Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to June on the Range. Great BookTube event that I've been looking forward to all year, created by Michael K. Vaughan, designed to put the spotlight on Western, specifically Western short stories and novels. I think you could read Western nonfiction if you wanted to, but specifically Western novels and short stories, which once upon a time were if you were a freelance writer, they were a guaranteed way to make a living. They were as popular gets. Not true anymore. They're still published, but they're incredibly niche. You have to go looking for them. They ordinarily won't be stocked at your bookstore. The only Westerns that you are likely to see in your bookstore, your new bookstore, your mainstream Barnes & Noble type bookstore, is Western romance. And even there, Western romances used to be a huge deal, and they were all but ended. Because they're largely inappropriate to our reading sensibilities now. I'm going to be getting to that in June on the Range, but not in this video. Instead, I'm talking about, in this video, I read another Western from when they were the king of the bookstore. And it's another Western by William MacLeod Raine. I've been triangulating on this author in an attempt to figure out what his strengths and weaknesses are, what he's really like to read. I didn't intend to do this, but I read one and kind of sort of liked it, so I read another and didn't really kind of like it, and was noticing the whole time all sorts of strengths and weaknesses, all sorts of themes that this author likes to touch on. So I thought, before I exhaust my curiosity completely, before I move on to anybody else, I mean, we are still in early days in June. We've got more than 3 weeks left. So I've got a lot of Westerns still to read. I add a Western to my night's reading virtually every night. So I added one last night, another William MacLeod Raine. I added Mavericks to my reading last night. These things, he's a very fluid author, a very sometimes florid author, but his books are lightning quick to read. That's not a burden on the night's reading at all. And it's the story of a man named Larrabee Keller. And it's also the story of his tempestuous relationship with a woman named Phyllis Sanderson, who is very prominent in this book. That's a thing that I'm noticing about William MacLeod Raine, is that he very much likes to write the romance element of Westerns. They aren't romances. The point is still men being men and gunplay, and also a lot of men coming into their masculinity. There's a lot of that as well. There's a lot of strenuous living, and if you want the historical echo. But there's a lot of the idea I've encountered in every one of his books so far. There's the persistent idea that facing the brutalities and the violence of the Old West can make a man of you. With what constitutes being a man being an extremely limited menu. Let's just put it that way. I've noticed all of those themes, and I've been reading, but I don't know that it really repays to spend so much time on one author. I think William MacLeod Raine is an interesting author, certainly, but here Larrabee Keller and a character named Buck Weaver are having the kind of at loggerheads but maybe potential friends relationship that runs through so many old Westerns. Even when the potential friends, when it's an alternate reality completely and they end up killing, one kills the other, you still get the sense that they're fighting because they're alike rather than because they're different. On some elemental He-Man level. This is also, the backdrop of this novel is also very much the conflict between cattle herders and sheep farmers. First, the conflict between those two, because they don't go together at all, and they hate each other, and they've fought whole range wars against each other. But also, the conflict between cattle herders and sheep farmers and settlers, homesteaders, who are looking to move in vast numbers, increasing numbers. I've seen this note hit in a number of Westerns that I've read, where the ranchers, the cattle ranchers and the sheep farmers, start to feel about this constant wave of homesteaders from the east. More and more of them showing up in wagon trains, in the encroaching train lines. More and more of them showing up. Just that those ranchers and sheep farmers start to look at those incoming crowds of people in much the same way that the Native American tribes looked at the ranchers. Like, wait a minute, we're already here. and there isn't enough land for all these people. We're already here, and it is pretty clear to us, whether it's the First Nations people saying it or the ranchers saying it, the thing being said is the same, which is that there's not enough land for all of us, and it doesn't look like you newcomers really care about sharing it. It looks like you're just planning on pushing us further out west. It looks like you're planning on just taking over. That is a very strong element in Mavericks. That could have made a different story than we get here. We get, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, it was certainly enjoyable to read, but we get here a totally trivial plotline about a bad guy who gets worse and worse as the book goes on, and a good guy who is compelling in every way and who is going to have his way with Phyllis, with Phil, all throughout the book. Sparks fly right from the beginning. They have a very, as I mentioned, a very Cary Grant, Rosalind Russell type of, or Moonlighting for you of 5 generations later, a very snappy rom-com type faux adversarial relationship that hides a growing romantic attraction. And William MacLeod Raine is very good at that. It's very, very dated. It's a very dated kind of good. He's very good at it, but it is very much a 1930s or 1920s things to be good at. We don't do it that way anymore. No one writes it that way anymore, and it feels creaky. You can look at it, you can read it in a book like this and say, well, it's done really well here. It is done really well here. The action, maybe not so much. I don't think William MacLeod Raine really has his heart in any of the action scenes that I've seen him write. But that part, the personal part, even the one-liners, this guy has fantastic comic timing. It's not as prominent in this book as it was in the last one, but he has fantastic comic timing. He knows exactly how to land comic dialogue. It's not exactly something that you find in Western novels. But he's a fan of florid descriptions, as I mentioned. I want to read you one of them. I want to read you an example here. I don't have the book, because, of course, I read it on my e-reader. I read on my e-reader. The Star Trek device, it weighs an ounce. It's a Star Trek metal device. It's a whole library. It's 7,000 books on this thing. With just anyway, that's a different video. Let me read you just a passage that I want to mention here. When they meet, when our characters meet, when Phil meets Keller, he was a hunted miscreant, wounded, riding for his life as a hurt wolf dodges to shake off the pursuit. But strangely enough, her gallant heart thrilled to the indomitable pluck of him. Never had she seen a man who looked more the vagabond enthroned. His crisp bronze curls and his superb shoulders were bathed in the sun-pour. One word, sun-pour. Not once, since his eyes had fallen on her, had he looked back to see if his hunters had picked up the lost trail. He was as much at ease as if his whole thought at meeting her were the pleasure of the encounter. I'm not going to cast aspersions on William MacLeod Raine, but I don't know of any other. I have not read, like I've mentioned, I'm not all the most read in Western novels. I read a lot of them, thanks to June on the Range. But I do not know of any other Western writer who mentions the look of sun pour on a young man's hair. I'm not going to cast aspersions on William MacLeod Raine. I don't know if there ever was a Mrs. William MacLeod Raine, but I don't think a lot of women were reading this book. That's what I guess what my point is here. Oh, God. All of my choices today for the booktube events I'm in are all leading me astray in one way or another, or at least being hard to talk about. The ending of this, of course, the larger issue of settlers versus ranchers is never really handled. It can't be. And the slightly smaller background issue of ranchers versus sheep farmers is never really handled. In this book, as in all other Westerns where those issues have come up, the author instead opts for the easier choice of a bad guy to shoot. We've got those background issues. We could address them. I could write about them, but I'd rather just have the bad guy get his comeuppance. And that happens here, and the way that it happens is completely predictable. The relationship and the development of the relationship is completely predictable. I didn't so much mind William MacLeod Raine, like I mentioned, he is a congenial writer to read. You're just turning the pages. He's keeping a smile on your face the whole time. On my face, anyway. But I think I've learned as much about him as I want to learn for right now. I will return to him. He wrote a lot of novels. I'll return to him in the course of June on the Range this year. But I think I'm ready to move on. Not only to a different author, but a different in italics author. In fact, I think what I want is a Western author who takes this genre very, very seriously. I don't think William MacLeod Raine, I don't think at heart he does. And that's not a criticism. I want to read somebody who takes this really, really seriously. So I will be more or less looking for that in my next June on the Range book, the one I toss on the pile for tonight. And I will report back as to how I succeed, if I do. But anyway, there you go. That's June on the Range for today. I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.